Okay.
It's not because of something you said.
Okay, I hope so.
They're in the class, yeah.
I'll try to not put anybody to sleep or
Yeah,
anything.
Yeah, so around one, so we'll try to kind of wrap up and we can hope for some Q&A or something before that would be good.
Yeah, I'm aiming for 20 to 25 minutes of talk, and the rest will be Q&A. Karen, could you plug me in over here just in case? I might as well. Yeah. The purpose of that is just to get the cord out of the way more than anything. Thank you.
Hey everybody, I want to welcome you to Impact Training. Glad you're here today. Kind of like two sides of the room, only Tyler's in the middle. Glad y'all are here. It's the last one of February, so it's nice to fly by. So spring break mission trip's coming up, 12 days from today. So I know a lot of you are signed up for that. If you have not gotten signed up for that, there's a QR code should be somewhere around here that you can cancel that. But join us next Saturday, hey, I'm really excited for our Impact Training today. Carlos and Karen Benitez are here with us. They have been longtime partners of the church that I go to, Southfield Christian Fellowship. They have been in many places throughout the world engaging in scripture translation. When it comes to languages, the Bible, and how does that work together, they're a fountain of information. And so I'm really glad to have them here. They're stateside for a while, and so we're really grateful to have them because they're not always available to come talk with us. And so Carlos has even given us a very cultural experience today. And so, very grateful for their presence here with us. And so I know that we're going to be edified and built up today. Let me pray for us, and then we will go ahead and start. God, we give you thanks for your word that is so good, that gives us truth, and it teaches us about who you are. God, thank you that your heart is for every single person in this world to know who Christ is, who Jesus is, God, to encounter your spirit, God, through your word. And thank you for the work that Carlos and Karen have been doing. And God, thank you that we can be here today and learn from them. So I pray that we would be encouraged and edified today, and that your name be glorified through our time together. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Welcome, Carlos.
Okay, I'm going to try to not go into professorial mode. So, in case any of you missed it, Karen and I are Bible translators. Karen, stand up. She's... Woo! Karen's the real brains of the operation, in case there's any doubt. And people think she's my daughter, but she's actually older than me. So, yeah, nobody believes that, but okay. All right. So just to give you a little bit of background about us, we are working on Bible translation in the Republic of Niger. How many people have ever heard of the Republic of Niger? Okay, more of you than is average. Most people say Nigeria, and no, just think north of Niger, north of Nigeria, south of Libya and Algeria. And here are some pictures of us there with our children. Karen's not wearing an outfit, but this afternoon, but this is often what she would wear. And she's there with our daughter in that picture. Our daughter is now 23, and she is a recent graduate of Texas A&M University. Do I hear any hisses? Yeah, okay. All right. And our son is, he's almost 30. And he works at Baylor University. Any hisses from that side? Okay. No hisses about Baylor, but yes from Texas A&M. Wow. In 2014, we got reassigned to Southeast Asia, mostly because it wasn't as safe as it used to be in the Republic of Niger, although the translations are continuing. And we were based out of Thailand. It's yellow on the map. It's not yellow in real life. And if you see a little dot up on the top in Chiang Mai, that's the city where we were living in Thailand. We were working with, how many people have ever heard of Wycliffe Bible Translators? Okay, that's good to know. How many have not heard of Wycliffe Bible Translators? Okay, it's an organization that specializes in what? Bible translation, right. And what we were doing in Thailand, we were part of the linguistics faculty at PIAP University. So here I am with a couple of our students, and here is Karen with a couple of our students. So before anything else, I'm about to start on the presentation. So two things that I just want to get across is that, one, translation can get complicated. Anybody have any doubts about that? And it can take a bit of time. So it's not something you can do in a week. It's not something you can do in a month. It's not even something you can do a little bit in a year if you already know the language. But most people, well, once you know the language, you're really it takes a while, basically. And we could talk about that. And a good translation is a result of a team effort. So it's a group of people that's working in a team together, and each with their gifts, okay? How many people know what that is, the Lone Ranger? How many don't know who the Lone Ranger? Okay, see, this is, as I'm getting older, I'm starting to realize that a lot of people don't know who the Lone Ranger is. That's the Lone Ranger, that says it all. Okay, so nobody that's working in Bible translation does it alone. This is a team effort. And just to let you know where this thing is headed, we're going to talk mostly about the first three: language assessment, language analysis, and cultural studies. So the first thing that we want to talk about is, before a translation gets started, the first thing you need to know is, does this translation really need to be done? Do we need another translation into Spanish or English? Probably not. But before a translation gets started in language X from in Asia or in Africa or wherever you happen to be, you need to start asking the correct questions. Is there already a translation in this language? Do people understand it? We were in a couple of places where there were already translations in a language. People didn't understand them for various reasons, so maybe a revision might have been needed. Is the community bilingual enough to use a translation in another language? Or is the language dying out? You'd be surprised how often that happens. We know of a woman who worked on a translation in South America that had 12 speakers left, and they were all over 50. So most of what she wound up doing is documenting the language. This was documenting the language structures and the phonology. By the way, I am a linguist, so I might throw out, if there's a term that you don't understand, please write it down and throw a rock at me. No, don't throw a rock. Throw a piece of paper, raise your hand, start dancing up and down or whatever, get my attention, and I will answer it as best as I can. So, dialect intelligibility. Okay, this is kind of a rough question. What's a dialect and what's a language? Anyone here from China? No? Okay. In a lot of parts, for example, of China, they'll be speaking there. Where are you from? Are you from China? You're from here? Okay, can you understand from someone who grew up, for example, in just north of Korea, if you are in Kunming, if they're not speaking in Mandarin? No. And yet they're called dialects. What's a dialect? What's a variety of a language? And that this for political reasons. Generally, when a linguist says a dialect, it means that they'll generally understand probably up to 60-ish to 7 to 80%. Anyway, that many minority languages have a number of dialects spread across a wide area. So there's a language called Cree, and this is in Southeast Asia. So you look at all these words that they have for, hey, stop it. And for pretty normal stuff. Did we lose the... We'll try this. Technology is wonderful when it works. Are we getting it back? Technology is so...
It's gonna work.
Technological. My computer thinks something is connected. Okay. Awesome. So I actually recognize a number of these words from Thai. So at least one or a couple of these words must be Laotian. So we talk about language, the attitudes toward various dialects. So for example, a dialect could be socially acceptable or it could be not socially acceptable. So how would it work if y'all are the salt of the earth in English? What do you think? Yeah, the Texan thinks it's great. Yeah, I like it too, but you know. Or Ewans are the salt of the earth. Okay. Use guys. Okay. So before we start a translation, we need to know a number of questions. How many of these dialects understand each other? Which dialects are socially acceptable for a translation? And we're going to stop there. I'm not going to get in. We just basically have to do a lot of careful surveys to make sure. And even then, situations change. So we're always keeping an eye on the situation. Okay, language analysis. How many people here speak something other than English? Okay, how many are monolingual English speakers? Okay, see, you all are not normal around the world. Most parts of the world, people speak 3 or 4 different languages. I've been to places where people can speak as many as 7 or 8, and I was like extremely impressed. It just depends on what we call language domains. And the first thing we need to do is learn the language, sometimes 2. So I really felt bad for people working in Southeast Asia, for example, who had to learn a major language such as, I don't know, Thai before getting on to working on the language that they were going to be working in. We actually had to learn French before we went to Niger. And that one, being a first language Spanish speaker, was so easy for me. I was just like, oh. So other people have a more difficult time. What other languages do we have represented here? You said Spanish? God's language, of course, yes. Any other? Do you have another language? Igbo, okay. All right. Southeastern Nigeria? Yeah. Yeah. So, excellent. I'll just tell you a little bit, for a lot of reasons, when we got to Niger, and if you want to know, you can ask me later, we on purpose did not learn Hausa or Zarma or Tamashek because we wanted to learn Tagdal. So if you want to know why, I'll explain later. But the first thing we need to do is we need to learn the language before we work on a translation. This isn't 100% accurate because so many people are multilingual, but when you arrive in a country as a Westerner, the first people that are going to approach you are the people that are pretty comfortable in a westernized environment. When you're working on a Bible translation, those are probably not the best type of people you want to work with. Okay? Generally, you're going to want to work with the core. Now, that it says monolingual, the core isn't always monolingual. In fact, that's actually rather unusual that there is a monolingual core. Now, in our situation, there was a monolingual core, especially among the women, but that's not normal. So that just helps us get to the core of the culture so that we could get and the language. And it's hard to distinguish where does the language start and the culture stop. Where does the culture, what's culture and what's language? It's actually quite complicated. So learning the language helps us to learn the culture better, train and work with the local people that we want to be working with, recognize the potential problems in the translation, and how many people have ever know that a lot of the languages out there have not been written? Okay. So we worked in Tagdal, and until we wrote it, we set up an orthography, there wasn't one. In a lot of these languages, we need to devise a good writing system. Sometimes if you're doing an oral translation, you can skip this, but generally we try not to. So we need to know the sound system of the language. Any linguistics people here? Okay. What's the sound system called? You remember? The phonology. Excellent. Now, when you talk about phonology, that's only one tool that helps you figure out an orthography. So, for example, Rotokas in Papua New Guinea only has 11 letters. And they also have a horribly complex grammar. But anyway. Yes. Yes. An orthography, generally when people think of orthography, they think about writing down the sounds, but it's also a little more complicated. It's like what words go together, what parts of the word are split apart. For example, the plural, boys. Well, do you attach the S or do you separate the S? And there are definite ideas for how to determine whether something should be separated off or put together. One big question is, what do people themselves want? And if the writing system doesn't fit the language well, or if it's not socially acceptable, this has happened on a number of occasions. People might reject the system. They won't be able to read the translation if your translation is written. Sometimes it isn't. And just a bad writing system has spiritual implications. I won't talk about English, because English has a horrible orthography. Sorry. But just to give you an idea, this is the translation that we've been working on. What does that tell you by looking at that? Yeah, right to left? How do you know? Excellent. Okay. Anything else? What else can you tell from that, just looking at it? It's based on Arabic? Excellent. Sorry? It can be dense compared to, let's just say, it's about 1/3 longer. It takes about 1/3 more space than English. English is an awfully economical language compared to others, at least in terms of how much space it takes up. We had to take this orthography, this alphabet from Arabic, borrow it, and we had to make allowances for sounds that don't get written in Arabic. It turns out that they do exist in Arabic, but they're not written down. But if you're talking about people that generally aren't used to reading, we have to, for our orthography, we have to represent everything, every single option. Whereas if you look at the average Arabic, it doesn't have what's called diacritics, all the little things above and below and on the side and all that. A lot of the Arabic doesn't have a lot of diacritics because generally you can tell from the context what the word is, whereas in our context, most of the readers are going to be new readers, so if we don't have the diacritics, they're not going to be used to saying, oh, okay, there's not a vowel after this. Any questions, comments, rocks, insults? Yes?
So when you have to come up with like a writing system, are you also part of teaching people how to read?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we are, it's a work in progress. And yeah, this is Karen's specialization, is orthographies. My specialization is much more language context, sociolinguistics. Any other questions? I'm going into professorial mode. Stop.
So generally, vowels aren't.
Yeah, go ahead.
Generally, vowels aren't written in the Arabic script, but so we had to devise a way to write vowels using what they call diacritics, is that the little dots and squiggles up and down.
Yeah.
Well, mostly.
So just a little bit of a story. I remember we had a little bit of trouble. We needed to represent 6 vowel sounds. And classical Arabic represents 3 vowel sounds, even though they have the other 3 vowel sounds in spoken. And one day, and I just said, I don't know, what are we going to do? Somebody showed me the Warsh Quran. And for any, there are different kinds of Qurans, but the Quran generally used in North Africa, there are a few textual differences, but a lot of the biggest differences are they represent the vowels differently from the Hafs Quran. Anyway, that one had all of the symbols that we needed for proper pronunciation, because when you're pronouncing the Quran, it's the proper pronunciation that's important for them. And they had all of the vowel symbols that we needed, so I don't like to reinvent the wheel. I just took all those symbols and I said, this is what we're going to use. And I wrote out by hand this really quick, it was either a short folk tale or a long proverb, I don't know, somewhere in between those two. And I showed it to this old guy, and he looked at it, and at first he stumbled on the unfamiliar symbols. And I said, well, I got him from the Warsh Quran, and he kind of rolled his eyes. And he said, we like the Hafs Quran. Oh, okay, well, fine. But once he got the idea of what the symbols were, he read it absolutely perfectly. So I thought, yes, this orthography works. Except that the guy looked at me after he read it, and he says, this is too easy. Even a woman could learn how to read this. And he flung it at me like this with his left hand, and as he was rubbing his long beard. And I thought, well, we're running into values differences at that point. As part of language analysis, we talk about language styles. More than just individual words or sentences, it's how language styles are used. Sociolects, another technical word. Basically, the idea is that men sound like men, women sound like women. This is not a big deal in the languages we're working in, but in some languages it is a big deal. Old versus young speech, social class differences. So it's important to understand the sociolective differences. So imagine, and the Magi came from the east and asked, hey man, where can we find this guy who been born the king of the Jews anyhow? Would that have worked? Actually, we wouldn't have translated something like that anyway, but okay. Genres. So imagine, once upon a time, God created the heavens and the earth. What does that imply if we use that to introduce this text? That it's a folk tale or a fairy tale, and it's not true. A little better, maybe. But that's not what it says. It's in the beginning. All right. Finally, we're going to get into cultural studies. And then I'm going to give you guys 2 little tests. So the idea is that to learn the language, it'll help us learn the culture better. And that helps us do a good translation. Bless you. And part of the problem is that most people around the world, they don't think a lot about the culture. They just think about this is just how things are. This is just how the universe works. So, what's this? It's your normal house in the U.S. This is a normal house in Ghana, for example. Now, just to give you an idea of part of the problem is that people will assume that their culture is normal. Second of all, if they don't understand it, they're going to only use, this is actual basic linguistics or basic communications, people use just as much brain power until they think they've got it, and then they stop. And so they'll use their own cultural grid. So for example, in Thailand, they have these things called spirit houses right outside their house. And you'll often see it's so that the spirits will go and they'll hang out in the house, so they'll give the spirits little dolls to play with, I guess, or, and little slaves. They represent their slaves that they're giving to the spirit, so that they'll go in the house and not go inside the big house where the people are, and basically leave the people inside alone. When somebody showed a picture of a house from the U.S., this kind of a house, they assumed that the mailbox was a spirit house. Okay? Also in Thailand, they saw a picture from, your normal Bible picture where it shows Jesus wearing robes. And the assumption was that Jesus was a ladyboy. Is that what you're trying to communicate? That's actually a very common thing in Thailand. So let's look at this back translation. How many know what a back translation? Probably, should I explain a back translation? Yeah, Ziga is in Asia, just to let you know. A back translation is when we're testing what people understand of the translation. Usually you'll have a non-initiated, doesn't know anything about the Bible, sitting there, and you read to that person your translation, and they'll say back what they understood. So this was a back translation of John 3:16. What do you think the problem might be? It wasn't that they got incorrect words. It was their culture. Okay? Why did they think this? Okay? The guy wasn't trying to distort the meaning of the scripture. It was just a natural consequence of him assuming that his culture was the norm all around the world. So let's look back at where this guy's coming from. They're very zealous for land ownership. God wanted to possess the earth. Makes sense, doesn't it? Relatives are often used as go-betweens. Scams are really common, not just in Asia, but all over the world. Whoever was deceived by him or believed in him, think about this, People who die become ghosts on earth forever. What do you think? What would you do in that kind of a situation besides go back to the drawing board? John 3:16 ain't working for us. Any ideas? We'll talk a little bit about this later, but part of the thing is yes, go ahead. Maybe. I'm not sure what they did in this situation, to be honest with you. Part of the problem is they may have to unpack, they may have to unpack some of the meaning so that there's less ambiguity what it really means. But thankfully, in our case, this wasn't a problem. John 3:16 was actually pretty simple. I don't know what they did in this case, but we have a number of, if in case of X, Y, that kind of a thing. But this is the kind of stuff you don't want to get to the point where you're testing the translation and you find out, oh my gosh, we've got to go back to the drawing board because people are not getting this. So often people ask us, why not do a literal translation? And this is, it's actually kind of a funny website, English.com, but sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's more like, dude, you don't know. Anyway, yeah. There are cultural things, but I kind of understood this kind of stuff, but it's not natural English. This is from Japanese, by the way. So, for those who understand Spanish, when you say how much, how do you say how much in Spanish? You don't say como mucho. That's, as we would say in Spanish, disparate. Really, you have a different expression for that. You would say cuánto es. So this is why we don't do literal translations per se. We're not going to get into the training of the co-workers. I could tell you plenty of stories about that, but now I'm going to test you guys. There was a case. How many of you are familiar with the parable of the wedding feast? Now, let's look at it real fast. Jesus replied, "Do wedding guests mourn while celebrating with the groom? Of course not. But someday the groom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast." Okay. So the word here in English, in our English translation, is wedding guests, which is actually, now this is what I do with my students. Woo, I have stuff dancing all over the screen. Be thankful. Anyway. In Greek, wedding guests, literally what it means is the children or the sons of the bridal chamber. Great. This makes tons of sense, doesn't it? All right. There's a culture in the Republic of Niger where a girl, so remember, when people don't understand something, it is natural to use just as much brain power until you think you understand it. This is just a universal human thing. And then when you think you got it, okay, that's it. And you go on with your life. Well, there's a culture in Niger where a girl has to get pregnant and have a baby before she can get married. Okay? The people that worked on the translation, thankfully these were not Wycliffe members or SIL, they were another group. But anyway, their attitude was, if it's a verb in Greek, it needs to be a verb in the target language. And when I heard one of them tell me that, my hair got a little bit grayer. I thought, oh no, what's going to happen? Well, this is one of the things that happened. They translated, "Do the sons of the bridal chamber mourn while celebrating with the groom. And they said, "Who are the sons of the bridal chamber? The children of the bridal chamber. Who are they?" And they said, "I know who that is. Those are the children that the woman would have had before she could get married." Is that what that means? No. So what do you think? This is for us to use our brains. How would we translate? This is a trick question, okay? How then would you translate the children of the bridal chamber? Any ideas? Come on. You're all college students. You can do it. Anybody? Okay. Try to describe a different way. How would you describe it? You're starting to get it. And this is actually a trick question. The way you translate the children of the bridal chamber, wedding guests. Right? So this was okay, that was mean. Sorry. It was a trick question. Now here's actually one of the things. This actually started a cult in Niger. A bad translation helped a cult to get started. So this is important stuff if you don't get it right. Let's think about something a second. What are the fruit of the Spirit? What does that mean? Is it, first of all, is that an expression that we use in English? Yes and no. I mean, you go out to You go out to the street and you start talking to your average person about the fruit of the Spirit. What are they going to say? Versus the fruit of the flesh, to use the expression used in New Testament Greek. What is your average person that hasn't grown up in the church going to say about that? Are they going to understand it, first of all? No. Okay. So in other words, and I'm going to throw this out there, is fruit of the Spirit a good translation? It just needs, it might or it might not be. But it doesn't make tons of sense in natural English, does it? Problem is that in our region of Niger, the word for fruit is the same word as the word for children. Okay? And these pictures, that picture is of Malagasy children in Madagascar. And let's think about this for a second. This group of a church, they wanted to break off in the first place, so it's not 100% the fault of the translators. But this group in this church, they were a Pentecostal group that mixed in a lot of pre-Islamic and traditional practice from Niger into their Pentecostalism. And they said, the children of the Spirit, who are these children of the Spirit? Because that's what the first thing that entered into their minds instead of fruit of the Spirit. And they said, we know exactly who that is. That's us. And therefore, they used that as a springboard to start their own denomination / cult. And it caused all kinds of problems and a division within the Assemblies of God. And as far as I know, there was Al-Qaeda that came in and caused all kinds of problems, so I don't know if they're still around. So therefore, how do you best translate karpos tou pneumatu, the fruit of the Spirit, in a case like this? Okay, the effects of the Spirit. This actually got resolved when someone did if I remember correctly, they did a revision of that translation. Any other ideas? Because if people aren't going to understand your translation, it doesn't make sense to... I'll tell you what they did. They said, instead of using the expression fruit of the Spirit, which doesn't make tons of sense anyway, they translated it as, these are the characteristics of someone who is controlled by the Holy Spirit, versus the characteristics of a person who's controlled by the human nature. What do you think? Yeah. Sometimes that's part of translation. You got to make choices. This is where I stop, and I'm going to ask what I always ask my students. They were a little older than you, but anyway, questions, comments, rocks, insults, hugs, rotten fruit, flowers, anything. That's a long question, and it's a very good one. Well, I'll answer it in a second. I'm just gonna, for the people recording, the question was, what does it look like when you start working on a language that has not been written? Is that correct? I can only tell you what our case was. We started with linguistics now this is, Karen, please feel free to, because this is your specialization actually. The first thing we did was analyze the language, and we started out by collecting texts in the language. Yeah, well, we started by recording texts, so we would get in front of a young guy. We couldn't get any women, unfortunately, but we weren't allowed more than 25 kilometers outside of the capital, so we started out by working with speakers of the language who were kind of socially questionable young men. Then as we got to know the language better, we realized that some of these socially questionable young men were in the middle of shifting toward Tamashek, usually, sometimes Hausa. But in any case, so they didn't speak the language all that well, but we figured it out. We transcribed the texts using the International Phonetic Alphabet. Do you know what that is? Okay, good. Somebody knows what it is. Okay. Woohoo! Yeah. So we started with the International Phonetic Alphabet, and we transcribed it. Based on these transcriptions, we figured out which of these sounds were letters, what the letters were in this, in other words, the phonemes. Figured out what words, and there's still questions about that, what goes together, what doesn't, but we've got a working orthography. What do you think, Karen? Help me out. Because it's a...
I mean, we had to work with somebody who was bilingual in French to be able to write down everything that we heard and then be able to translate it kind of word by word.
Yeah. We transcribe it, and then we have there's an app called well, it doesn't matter, but then the app it's actually an SIL app called Flex, and it's very good for transcribing text. There's another one that's SIL. The other one is called, I see that. The other one is Elan. Now Elan is from University of somewhere in Germany, Leipzig. Yeah, Max Planck Institute, and that one is actually better if you've got text and sound. So, and now they're working on getting these with AI, so AI can either be
easier these days than it was back
Yeah, back then, we had, we would put this, we were using these things called cassette tapes, and then we would put the little microphone, and I would tell the guy, tell me a story about the girl that you love, and then he would start, oh, she's beautiful, she's got a neck like a camel, which I don't think sounds overly attractive, but okay, and that way he'd get lost and forget that he's being recorded. Or tell me a story about when you were really scared, and he's reliving that story. And yeah, go ahead.
So whenever you come across people who speak a language that is either dying or like hard to, it doesn't have a written system, doesn't have orthography in place, do you find that they have no experience with reading and writing, or they do have experience just in a different or common language?
Oof. Okay, you're asking two different questions. When you run into a situation where the language is not written, do they have experience in another language, or are they completely monolingual? The situation where somebody is completely monolingual is more rare than it used to be, although it still happens. The typical situation in Asia is that the children will often have had experience with orthographies in usually a big language like Thai or Lao or some other Vietnamese. So it depends. Yes. I think it depends on the organization. In our case, we specifically felt called to work with the least reached. So, boy, were we working with the least reached. But anyway, that was, it's a really long story, but the organization listened to us and said, okay, we want to honor that you want to work with the least reached, so let's see what we can do. And we wound up in Niger. And yes, go ahead.
Sorry,
It's okay.
So I know there are other Bible translation organizations, like I think there's Pioneer Bible.
Yes.
Other ones. How do y'all keep track of like, oh, I've already translated something here with this organization, or like, are y'all talking with each other?
Yes. Yeah, we are talking very closely with each other. So yeah, I'll talk to you later about that if you want to talk about it. But yes, and each organization is going to have its own distinctives. So for some people, I would recommend Wycliffe. Other people, I would not recommend Wycliffe. Ooh. You're going to get me in trouble because I am a member of Wycliffe, and yet I'm not 100% in agreement with Wycliffe's policies these days. If you want to work in linguistics, you could do a lot worse than Wycliffe. If you're interested in doing linguistics, like if you want to do a lot of pioneer type of stuff, not as much Wycliffe as much as SIL. I don't know if you know what that is. SIL is still doing a lot of pioneer linguistics. If you just want to work in translation and not do a lot of linguistics, if you don't want to do a lot of literacy work and stuff like that, depending on the organization, I would recommend something like Pioneer Bible Translators. So that's a huge question, and you'd have to look at the distinctives of each of those organizations. Yeah, we can talk later, but just to let you know, I have a PhD in linguistics. My wife is going to do her PhD hopefully soon, so that gives you an idea of linguistics, SIL, and the culture of SIL. And that's not always good, it's not always bad. Yes? I think it helps to think linguistically, but you don't have to have a background in it. So, for example, Martin Luther was a theologian, but he could think linguistically.
You can,
Yeah.
you can have a background in like biblical studies, like exegesis, like seminary kind of things, and then you would come alongside and help a translation that's already been going on in the community with a mother tongue speaker. Or another thing is we haven't talked about this much today, but literacy. Somebody did ask about teaching reading and what we call language development issues. But no, you do not have to be a PhD linguist, and you don't even have to have a degree in linguistics to be involved in translation or peripheral, well, they're not peripheral, but core issues of like reading and writing. And also I've done some work with art, so it's all ethno arts, is using people's the things that people know from their culture and helping with education through what they know, which is the arts and music, things like that.
Yeah, every situation is going to be really complex. So, yes.
So since you said y'all aren't usually doing a little translation, and it's more like, I guess, idea by idea, how do y'all, like, y'all have a background in biblical studies, or is there a theologian that works with y'all? How, like,
Yeah. That's part of the team. Yeah, and actually I was trained in Greek and Hebrew, more Greek than in Hebrew. And then as I started learning linguistics, I started applying the linguistics to the Greek and had to forget 90% of what I learned in my undergraduate Greek classes. So I'm actually taking a class right now, so in exegesis and how to apply discourse level phenomena, higher level than the sentence, to New Testament Greek.
We didn't really get into this, but there are very stringent testing
Yeah.
and checking. So testing is what you test it with the community to find out what they understand by it. And then you have a consultant, who are the people who make sure that what is being translated is what it follows the biblical text, like what is supposed to be translated. So it's we didn't get into that at all about
Yeah, that's part of the big team that.
consultant checking.
So yeah, usually in our case, when a translation is being, we do what is called testing, and the in-group vernacular, what that means is we ask people, we will read the translation to someone who is uninitiated, which in our case is really easy to find someone who is not familiar with the biblical text. And the big question that we're asking is, does it make sense? Does it sound like it's good target language? The next thing that we ask after that is, the next type of checking is we call it checking. It's really the same thing, but that's when you have a translation consultant who knows a lot about the cultures in the region and knows about the biblical languages, who will get together with that person, sometimes online, sometimes in person. It's harder to do it in person in Niger now because of instability, but we'll get together with that person, and we have another uninitiated speaker, and then we read the translation to them, to the uninitiated to another uninitiated speaker. That person back translates into usually French or another language that everybody shares, what they understood. So you remember the John 3:16 example? That was a back translation, and it was immediately evident that from the back translation that this person did not understand. But hopefully it's not quite that bad.
Just to summarize, there's 4 big words
Mm-hmm.
Is it natural? Is it natural language? And then fourth one is acceptable, like, and we did kind of, acceptable would mean is like, is the language acceptable, like, not using y'all are the salt of the earth, that's part of what acceptable is, but.
Excellent questions. Any others? Yes.
It sounds like you guys use like newer technology a little bit with some of your translations.
Yeah, well, it depends.
Like, right nowadays, like, we started, what, 3 years ago or so?
So I
It's really hard to keep up with some of the new technology that is coming up that really helps with translation, and some of the AI things that are coming, that are coming through, like, I think we gotta quit, but, we could talk a little bit about
Yeah, so
technology.
I'm opening up one of the programs, one of the apps that we use is called Paratext. This was in its testing phase when we left Niger, and I'm having to learn it on the fly, and I still have no idea what's going on half the time. But
But just, considering so now we can do what we call a draft zero with AI.
with AI, but
Which means,
yeah,
I'm not saying AI is gonna change everything, but at least, like, let's say we translated the whole New Testament and now they want to do the Old Testament. We can feed the Old Testament into AI and we get what we call a draft zero for some of the Old Testament. And a draft zero doesn't mean first draft. There's still gonna have to be human, as with anything in AI, there's still gonna have to be like human checking and interaction. But, just the possibilities, to me, this is a little more cynical, but are amazing.
my opinion is if you build something idiot-proof enough, someone will just build a better idiot. So, I don't trust technology to do my brain work for me. But this is Paratext. So what you have here, and it's not all loaded up immediately. My computer just did an update, so I don't know why it's taking longer than usual. Hey, where'd you go? Oh, there you go. It's done. Anyway, Paratext, what it does is it combines a bunch of different windows and a bunch of different translations, and you can be looking at, so we're working on Matthew right now in our team, and so I can have Matthew and I have the Greek, and then on the side I have a commentary. Then there's Logos. Do you know Logos? Did you ever have that yeah, anyone that's in seminary knows about Logos. Logos, we had this thing for Wycliffe and SIL members called Translators Workplace that had a bunch of books. All of a sudden that now it's part of Logos. And so I have access to a library that has a bunch of
When we first went overseas, we had to carry all of our hard copy books, and it was like,
yeah, I don't need.
But now, praise God, we don't.
Yeah, Logos is great, except, okay, you asked me about Flex for SIL, and here it is. Flex is actually better for dictionaries unless you've got media.
I'm just gonna say,
So,
if you're a techie kind of guy, there is a
or
lot
girl.
to support, or girl. There's a lot to support Bible translation and all of this kind of language technology.
So here's Logos. If anyone who ever got to seminary or Bible school or something, like I've got all these books open. I don't really like the Analytical Greek New Testament there as much as I like it in Paratext, because that one actually, when I'm reading the New Testament in Greek, I'm looking for grammatical information. I'm not as much looking for what case is, the grammatical case. Here is Flex. Let's see. Yeah, I've got it open to our dictionary, which is not anywhere near what it needs to be because I concentrated on speaking the language more than anything. So anyway, Yes.
Real quick before we end, this is not exactly what you've been talking about, but I think it's related. We have conversations on campus with people. It's possible someone would say, I don't trust the Bible because it's been translated so many times. What would you say to something like that? What would be a couple of things to keep in mind that you could share with people?
Off the top of my head, my it's like I remember reading. Don't ask me why. Just I remember reading Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars. I must have been really bored, but not in Latin because I don't know Latin. A translation of the thing, and I remember looking it up one day, and I said, where is this text based on? Because there's this thing called textual criticism, where you get into, you look at all these texts of the New Testament and of the Old Testament, and you get a pretty good idea of what the original said. But even then, there are still a few, like, I look up in Logos, it's got this little asterisk, like, what's in there? Oh, in this other text, it says it this way. Usually it's a change of word order, because Greek, you can change the word order without changing the meaning too much. And I looked up in Latin, and the Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars is based on mainly out of, I think, 5 copies, and the oldest copy is 400 years after. So how do we really know? Do you trust Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars? When you look at the texts that we have that our New Testament is based on, you've got thousands of copies, and some of the oldest copies, like you've got copies that were probably not an entire copy, but texts that are, or portions that are probably copied from the original. I mean, we don't know, but they're that old. So we have a much better idea of what the original text would have said than we do for a lot of the other stuff that's been translated. I won't even get into, like, the Republic by Plato. That's you're talking about 600 years after. So anyway, one last question? If not,
We say thanks, y'all.
And say, all right, how do we help Scripture be accessible to these people? Have you ever stopped to think about that? Like, what if you didn't have Scripture in your language? That's just wild. It's just wild, like, to think like that's something that we have never had to even think about. And so there are many, many people just like Benitez who are working towards this. And so I encourage you, like, this is something that's good to be aware of. This is a need, but also there are people who are devoting their lives to this. And I know that there's someone sitting here who's God doing something in their heart and their mind. It's like, how can I be involved in this? And there's a variety of ways you can be involved in that. Awareness is the first thing, though. So that's hopefully what we're getting at today. So very grateful. Yeah, for coming. Thank you so much for y'all being here. I really appreciate y'all. Now, I don't know if y'all remember, Carlos and Karen came out to the Map of the Nations we had on Tuesday night a few weeks ago. They brought some food, and y'all brought the peanut sauce. Yes. That's which is from what country?
West Africa.
West Africa. Cool. Yeah. All right, we're about to gather up. We're going to pair up over here and go out on campus. I wanted to just pray over our time today. And God, thank you for what we've heard today. God, may your Spirit be stirring in us and we have open hearts. hearts what you might be doing in us. We pray for our conversation.